All right, well, today I wanted to talk about the sibling pill. I find it fascinating that you can come from the same DNA as one of your siblings, but turn out completely different in appearance. You would think that having the same parents and the same DNA would allow you to have fairly similar physical characteristics as your siblings, but that's not always the case. I mean, in the vast majority of cases, siblings definitely resemble each other, and twins obviously resemble each other as well. And look extremely similar, even going well into adulthood, despite if one of them, grew up in a different household. Just look at Ashton Kutcher and his brother. Ashton turned out to be an A-list actor who was 6'2" and is extremely good looking, while his brother turned out to be much shorter and just has a pretty unattractive face, to keep it a buck. That has to be brutal coming from the same parents, but one sibling turns out to just have way better genetics. They got the better genes from their parents. Another example that's not as extreme is Brad Pitt and his brother. Brad Pitt is about 5'10", and his brother is about 5'7", 5'8". His brother isn't necessarily bad looking, but nowhere near as good looking as Brad. Brad Pitt ends up being a Hollywood actor because of his good looks, and his brother is just a normal, everyday run-of-the-mill guy. That's just the genetic lottery. Most of the siblings or twins that I knew growing up looked a lot alike in terms of height and their overall physical appearance. But there were two families that I wanted to talk about in particular that really amazed me. So I have three cousins who are all brothers, obviously. The oldest is 5'8". He lost all of his hair and is quite homely looking, to be frank. The middle cousin turned out to be 6'5", and is probably about average looking in the face. And the youngest cousin is about 6'2", with a pretty good looking face. Both the middle cousin and the youngest cousin are losing their hair as well, but they're not completely bald like the oldest cousin. Who knows, they may be there soon in the future, but they're all fairly close in age, and only the oldest one has lost all their hair. I'm talking like Norwood 7 hair loss, like Mr. Burns haircut from The Simpsons. The middle and youngest cousin are both probably around Norwood 3, Norwood 4. When I look at their dating history, the oldest cousin, who's 5'8", has actually never been in a long-term relationship. The middle cousin is married with a kid, and the younger cousin has been in multiple relationships with pretty attractive women, fairly attractive women, and is also going to get married in the near future. And their parents, my aunt and uncle, are both fairly tall. My uncle is about 6 foot, 6'1", and my aunt's about 5'7". So how did one of them end up being 6'5", and the other ended up being 5'8"? I mean, they grew up in a pretty nice household, and from what I could see the times I saw them was that they all ate relatively the same, and all three were sent to the same schools. So I don't think upbringing had a lot to do with it. For some reason, the oldest sibling just didn't grow past 5'8", and both his brothers were well over 6 feet. I remember he would joke about it and say things like, these are my younger, taller brothers. And he would point up at them. And I always wondered if that got to him, because he always seemed pretty down when I saw him. He would kind of put on a face, he'd kind of smile at the start, but then he would kind of be very introverted, wouldn't really say a whole lot. I couldn't put my finger on it, but his younger brothers just looked happier and they were much more outgoing. And the middle cousin had a kid and married a fairly decent looking woman. And it just can't be a huge coincidence that the two taller siblings had multiple relationships. And the oldest sibling, who's on the shorter side, didn't have any relationships. And the oldest cousin seemed to be the more reserved one. And like I mentioned, the younger cousins were much more outgoing, were cracking jokes, their personalities were much more developed. And the older cousin, who's 5'8", like I said, he was just very, very reserved, didn't talk much. If you tried to, strike up a conversation with him, it was a few words, and that was about it. But years ago, I was dating a girl who had two brothers, and this also really opened my eyes as well. So the younger brother was about 6'1" with blue eyes, and the girl I was dating, she had blue eyes as well. She was about 5'6", I would say. But she had an older brother that was about 5'7", just 1 inch shorter, 1 inch taller than her, and had dark brown eyes. And the younger brother and her were also noticeably better looking. And it wasn't just because of the blue eyes, but in the face as well. The older brother had more rounded facial features, and the younger brother and her had slightly sharper facial features. And when I looked at her parents, They both had pretty round facial features, but the mom had blue eyes and was slightly better looking in the face, and the dad had dark brown eyes and was slightly less attractive. And I think the younger brother, was in a relationship with a fairly attractive girl, and the older brother had just gotten broken up and cheated on by a girl that he was dating. And I remember that she would tell me that, her older brother always struggled to find dates, and that a younger brother was just like a big ladies' man. And I always thought that was interesting, and I really put two and two together at the time, partly because I stumbled upon this kind of content from Wheat Waffles during that year. And it wasn't surprising that the taller, better-looking brother just had a lot more success with women, and the older brother, who was shorter and just less attractive, it makes sense that he would struggle to get dates. And much like my oldest cousin, who was 5'8", the older brother of my girlfriend at the time was also much more reserved, and her younger brother was much more outgoing. And I think this could have been because of a lack of positive reinforcement throughout their life. So, as an example, my two cousins that are pretty tall and a little bit better looking, and then my ex-girlfriend's younger brother, being that they're taller and more attractive, they probably got more positive reinforcement from women, from people in general. Whereas my older cousin and then, her older brother, because they were shorter, they weren't as attractive, they became more reserved over time when they weren't getting that positive reinforcement. Maybe they got a lot of negative reinforcement instead. It just made me realize that the genetic lottery can be super random, but it affects your life in so many different ways. And I do think that there are obviously environmental factors that could influence height and your overall attractiveness. There may be one sibling who just has a much better diet growing up during development, and that could lead to that sibling becoming taller. One sibling could get better sleep or be given like HGH if they're playing a sport, but the vast majority of the time, it just comes down to genetics and the genetic lottery. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like. Feel free to comment down below any sibling pill you've noticed, and feel free to subscribe. Until next time, take care.